Today on The Sociologist, we're going to talk about neuropoliticism and the ways that we can analyze living brain structures, living people, citizens, voters, and the brain structures that correlate to certain political ideologies. Now, in recent years, we have had great spans in achieving analyzing living tissue brains, which previously we'd only been able to do on deceased brains. But now we have electroencephalographies, EEGs, functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRIs, that can penetrate brains of living subjects even while doing questionnaires, surveys, activities, being shown images, and seeing the correlations that happen between different ideological brain beliefs. Now, how do we apply this to politics? Recent studies by self-identified liberal and conservative thinkers were able to identify patterns that aligned with political beliefs and certain activities within given brain structures. Now, this was really fascinating, and the general outcomes of this were that liberal minds tended to be more empathetic towards others' suffering. This was shown with structures called the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC, which is what we do to imagine pain. Can you imagine hurting as this person is hurting? Can you imagine being in a country that you're unfamiliar with, languages you don't speak? Can you imagine being ripped away from your family? These are all physical or emotional or social pains that tend to be more predominant in brain activities of liberals. Liberals also exhibited a higher rate of activity within the left insula. This is the part of the brain that sympathizes with others outside the self. So this general takeaway on the liberal side of the political spectrum within these neurological imaging, these brain studies that we've done, is that it is much easier for liberals to sympathize with the pain of people outside themselves. Now, among conservatives, they showed a lot higher rate of activity within the right amygdala. The right amygdala is the emotional part of the brain reacting to external stimuli. So anything outside ourselves that's going to elicit an emotion within us. They also showed a higher rate of activity within the anterior insula. The anterior insula helps social structures and identifies what roles people may have within a group to sympathize. Hey, who is in my group? Who do I protect? Who do we keep out? So this general finding within the conservative ideology tends to be kind of like meerkats, keeping an eye out for anything that is different, anything that is pattern breaking to the given social structure, to the group that we already are, whatever that group may be: country, religion, family, race. Whatever threats may be to my group, and then identifying them and becoming afraid, instilling fear in others, letting the other meerkats know, hey, danger, keeping us safe. So some of the headlines, some of the reporting, some of the attitudes around these studies and these findings that I have seen are that liberals tend to be more empathetic. Liberals tend to be more empathetic and more imagining of suffering than conservative brains. Conservatives tend to be not as empathetic. I offer a critique that this is not the most productive takeaway from these studies and from these dichotomies. Both of these very visceral, neurological brain attitudes that we can observe tend to reflect within the sociopolitical cycles of each of these ideologies. For example, a lot of liberal news tends to be, hey, who is suffering and how can we help them? Who can we help? Who do we need to help? This liberal-minded attitude of wanting to find conflict and abate it, to help others that are suffering, tends to follow these kind of socio-political viewpoints. Now, along the conservative side, it is much more of a gatekeeper, much more of a security watchdog. What is coming to hurt us and how can we stop it? Identifying threats and reacting to them, eliciting these negative emotions to keep us safe, tends to be more of the conservative mind. Just looking at those attitudes that we've seen reflected within brain scans, you can kind of start to see why the headlines of these different echo chambers may look the way they do within liberal spaces and within conservative spaces. Just in the media, in journalism, within social media influencers, and the ideas that they perpetuate into the social wisdom. As well as this, let's view this through a myopic worldview. When you imagine that everyone could be just like you. For liberals, it tends to be very difficult to imagine anybody that would let somebody else suffer. anybody that cannot sympathize, cannot empathize with those in pain. This creates a dissonance, a political dissonance between the values, between the actions, and between the identities of where we can't identify with someone that doesn't have these traits. On the conservative side as well, when we project this idea of protecting the in-group, I only empathize with those within my in-group. I only have positive emotions to those of my tribe. I have negative emotions to those outside of it. This becomes reflected in voting for somebody different of your own ilk, outside of your own tribe. It's very difficult to imagine this. When we project this tribalism, this protecting the herd kind of mentality, it's very difficult to imagine voting for, helping, supporting, lending aid at risk to your own personhood, marginalized or victimized groups that are at risk of aggression if they are not of us. So how could you vote for someone that is of a different gender, of a different race than yourself? Obviously, the only people that would vote for them are people of that gender, people of that race. Anything outside of this paradigm creates a dissonance where you cannot imagine somebody voting for somebody outside their tribe, somebody outside their race, somebody outside their religion. And there's this incongruity to the ways that both parties view conflict, view others. One wants to sympathize, empathize with them, and one wants to keep us safe from whatever we define others as. So hopefully some of these studies, some of these findings offer a differing viewpoint onto the narratives around this quantitative evidence that we're just now starting to be able to correlate and attribute to causation within political discrepancies, political dissonances, political conflicts, so that we can kind of understand where some of the worldviews coming from the other side may be, where some of the emotional motivations and drivers, some of these inherent values that may go deeper than just in the voting booth and all the way into our brain physiology as well.